Hello, everyone. We're going to give just another minute for people to start filtering in from the waiting room, and then we'll begin our webinar. Okay, so we are now at 1 minute past noon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is China Osborne. I am a redevelopment project manager here with Metropolitan Redevelopment Agency. And thank you for joining us at our webinar today, Unlocking Tax Increment Financing. Before we begin, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. First of all, this webinar will be recorded and it will be available on our Metropolitan Redevelopment Area website, which is just cabq.gov/MRA. You can also Google it. And if you missed our last best practices webinar, it is also available on our website. So feel free to take a look at that one as well. Also, I wanted to remind you that the purpose of this webinar is really to provide a general overview of tax increment financing TIF. And we're looking at best practices across the nation. And at this time, we are not going to be providing specific Albuquerque examples, nor are we really going to be able to answer Albuquerque specific questions in relationship to the programs that we're going to be developing. There will be plenty of opportunity for the community to provide their input as we start rolling out those programs, probably early next year. Finally, on the format of this presentation, this is a webinar, so only our presenters will be able to come on camera and off mute. For the general public, we do ask you to put all of your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. If anyone has difficulty locating the Q&A, you can reach out to one of the presenters or actually to Sarah Supple or myself with MRA to get some guidance on that. So now it is my pleasure to pass this off to our director, Terry Bruner.
Thank you, China. Welcome, everybody, to our latest in a series of webinars on tax increment financing. We're really excited about today's presenter. I looked at some of the attendees, and I know a couple are from outside of Albuquerque or maybe new to TIF, or new to metropolitan redevelopment areas. But just as a little brief primer, metropolitan redevelopment areas and agencies are a unique part of New Mexico state statute, and we focus on the redevelopment of areas in Albuquerque that have been designated as blighted and in need of rehab, and have been doing that since the late 70s. And our superpower is really our ability to make direct investments into private commercial activities, along with public activities. So we, in a sense, work around the anti-donation clause of the state of New Mexico and are able to invest in housing and commercial development properties and do land sales and things like that. That's what's really unique about MRA. And in our enabling legislation, it says our focus is on economic and commercial development. We are not necessarily fighting crime or working on education or healthcare or all those types of things. That typically is not a strong consideration in what we do, but rather the built environment and how to incentivize commercial industry and economic development. Just a couple of years ago, Albuquerque led the charge at the state legislature to enable tax increment financing on the MRA area level. It had been done in the past on individual projects, but we really worked hard to expand it to our MRA designated districts. And that brings this new tool to the fore that we've been waiting on for a while. New Mexico was one of the last states out of all 50 states to have this type of tax increment financing program. So it really opens the door to a lot of advancement in the development we are attempting to do here in Albuquerque. So with that, I wanted to make an introduction of Toby Rittner, who's the president and CEO of the Council of Development Finance Agencies. That's a national association dedicated to the advancement of development finance concerns and interests. CDFA is comprised of the nation's leading and most knowledgeable members of the development finance community, representing hundreds of public, private, and nonprofit development entities. Members are state, county, and municipal development finance agencies and authorities that provide or otherwise support economic development financing programs. Mr. Rittner runs the day-to-day operations of the council, including the organization's various educational advocacy, research, resources, and networking initiatives. And, I've had a pleasure of working with this group over the years, dating back more than a decade, and I've attended their trainings and hosted them at times. And I just really want to strongly recommend that you look at CDFA's catalog. There's just a ton of stuff that they do and can show you about government finance and other issues. They're just a tremendous resource. And I think it was just about 10 years ago, I remember having them at Innovate Albuquerque in the downtown area, helping us understand how to look at projects and project finance and make investments around private sector development. So we're really lucky to have Toby Rittner here with us today. And I'll hand it over to you, Toby, to get started on the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. And I swear, everybody, I didn't pay him to say all that. So I appreciate the compliment. Sadly, I've been here 21 years and I've been to Albuquerque 3 or 4 times. That's a positive thing over those 21 years for CDFA. And it's awesome to be doing this with you all today. So thank you to China and Sarah and Terry and everybody for welcoming us to this conversation. All right, I'm going to lay some ground rules. You might see me look down here. That's my timer to make sure I don't go over my prescribed time. I think we're going to 3 o'clock or 3 o'clock our time, 1 o'clock your time. I want to make sure that we cover the material. I also want to just thank you all for being here and being open and willing to be a learner and to learn what you can about TIF. You'll see another wonderful person on the screen, Miranda. She probably won't speak at all today, but she makes it all happen. So she's making sure the technology works for me. And she is a manager in our advisory services division. So she kind of does all the pre-engagement with communities. Just interest of full disclosure, and I think it's important to note, we're not being paid to do this. We're volunteering to do this because we think it's important to move public finance forward in communities. And Albuquerque has an opportunity to embrace a new and expanded world of tax increment finance, and that's our goal. I wanted to start by saying something really important, and that is that you're not alone. I know that Terry mentioned that, New Mexico was one of the last to have this new power when it comes to TIF, but you're not alone out there. Washington State just approved TIF 2 years ago. Vermont has been going through a major dilemma with TIF over the last 2 years, and we've been advising and consulting with the state of Vermont and with Vermont's leadership about how to use their TIF tool, so much so that in the last legislature, they just passed a brand new TIF law to expand and grow TIF in their state. And we've done this all over the country, in Georgia, in California, in Illinois, in Wisconsin, in Minnesota. We've gone all over the country, Virginia, Maryland, and we've talked over the last 21 years that I've been here about how to use these tools, how to understand the tools, and then how to, embrace the best practices that are out there in other communities. So Miranda's are you gonna view my slides, Miranda? All right, let's go to the next slide, and we'll just jump into it. All right, first thing you should know is we're a nonprofit trade association, and so everything we say today is simply an educational engagement with you. We're not rendering any legal advice or advisory services. This is simply accepted educational material. So with that, we're going to be talking about a type of tool, a targeted tool. And I know I'm going to go fast because I have way too many slides, and I want to kind of get to some case studies at the end. So I'm just going to talk about TIF really quick. No, this will not apply to you 100%. In fact, maybe only 90% of it applies to you, or maybe only 75% applies to you, because New Mexico is going through the process right now of fully understanding and baking how this TIF tool is going to work. Now you have TIF, you have that project-specific type of TIF law. Now you're going to get the district-wide type of law, which is great, but we really need to understand the tool. I always believe in building the foundation and then going up from there. we can get more and more complicated as we go through this with you all. So when we look at TIF, it is what we call a targeted tool, which means that it's a tool that allows us to look at geography. We can look at physical geography in a community. We can designate that physical geography as a TIF district, so to speak, or whatever term ends up being used in your laws. You know, we call them TIF districts. And then we're allowed to use a tax treatment, some sort of ability to redirect taxes. So Miranda, let's go to the next slide and let's talk a little bit about this. So this is the second most common form of financing in our country. The most common form of financing is bond finance. Obviously, it's the foundation of all development finance. It has spread throughout the country. It started in 1952 in California. It's now in 48 states, plus the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico and American Samoa and Guam, and I believe Northern Marianas. I'm not positive about that, but it's called a different thing in different places. So in Georgia, they call it TAD. Most states call it TIF. And then Texas, because Texas is Texas, they call it TIRZ, Tax Increment Reinvestment Zones, which sounds very Texan. Now, what's interesting is the OG, you know, California doesn't have a TIF law now. They have a modified TIF law, but several years ago, they were heavily abusing TIF in that state. So the legislature and the governor ended the program. It has taken them many years, and they are working really, really hard to get their law back. And I have heard rumors that they'll probably introduce a new TIF law in the next couple of legislatures. So that's good. So this is a common tool. So first myth is that we're doing something new, radical, and crazy. New Mexico, you are not. You are using a tool in a toolbox, and now you're learning how to expand that tool in your toolbox, and that's important. So let's go to the next slide, Miranda. So what does it really mean? Well, this is a power granted to local governments that allows them to allocate specific tax revenues towards redevelopment, development, or renovation of the built environment. So what does that mean? It means it's a legal mechanism that allows you to capture the future benefits of real estate improvements, the future tax benefits, to pay for the present cost. The best way that I can analogize this is just to think about when you went to college. So when you went to college, you were 18 and you went to the bank and you borrowed some money to go to college. Maybe you borrowed $10,000 to go to college. Well, the bank wasn't using your current income as a means of repayment. They were using your future income. They were saying, you're going to get a job and you're going to earn a salary, and that paycheck, a portion of it, will come back to us for a repayment of your loans. And during that 4 years that you're in college, you don't pay those loans. But after you graduate, you begin to pay using your future earnings. If you don't go to college and you don't take out that loan, then nothing happens. But if you go to college, take out that loan, you repay it with your future earnings. And I know that's not the exact analogy, but it is, because you invest in yourselves to go to college so that you have income commensurate with the ability to pay back the debt that you incurred. So there's a specific kind of tax that we're allowed to allocate, and that's called increment. The increment is really important here because we have a piece of property. It's generating $50,000 of taxes right now. But if we improve it, it generates $550,000 of taxes. And so our increment is going to be all of that new tax above what it's currently earning. So let's go to the next slide and let's talk about increment. When we look at increment, we think about it this way. What are the new taxes as a result of development? It's the difference between what we call the frozen base, which is the current taxes being generated, and then that future tax generated. So there's a lot of different laws. Like I said, there's 48 laws, plus the districts and the territories. And all of the laws are similar, and then they're all different. So they might be 90% the same from Ohio to Michigan, but maybe there's a tweak. For instance, here in Ohio, where we're from, we have the most liberal law you could possibly have. We have multiple TIF laws, and just about every other year, the TIF law gets amended and fixed because there's a little part of development finance that it can't cover, so someone fixes it so it can cover that. But it can capture real estate taxes, sales taxes, income taxes, gross taxes, value-added taxes, or you could be like a state like Missouri, which does super TIF, which captures all the taxes. So the taxes that can be captured are going to be very specific to your state. And so start thinking now, like, okay, that's the tax that's captured. What's the base? What's the amount that the property is generating right now? And then how do we capture that new increment in our state? So why do we use this I'm sorry, Miranda, I'm going to forget that every time. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So why do we do this? Obviously, for the most obvious reasons, like Terry was mentioning, we want to encourage development, eliminate blight, address environmental issues. We want to do adaptive reuse of old buildings that we still value, that we want to turn into productive pieces of our economic engine. We want to finance infrastructure. I always laugh because when we do a TIF district, it doesn't always have to be just for private sector development. It can also involve public infrastructure, nonprofits, hospitals, schools, things that we need to build in our communities in order for our communities to advance. And then ultimately, we're doing it to create jobs, advance our economic development goals, revitalize our downtowns and our rural areas. And so it really is a catalytic, geographic, transformative tool. Next slide, please. All right. Who controls TIF? Well, Terry kind of said it, like, we're not going to have all the answers today, right? We're still trying to figure out the whole process, the new process in New Mexico. But generally speaking, states authorize the legislation, and then our local governmental jurisdictions, the city, the county, or the MRA in this example, are going to be the designees who create districts and who develop and catalyze those project areas. Now, development agencies could be like an MRA. It could be the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Pittsburgh. It could be like, again, here in Ohio, port authorities in Ohio often are the instigator of redevelopment in communities. They kind of implement the program. They set the standards. We're going down to Knoxville, Tennessee next week to do some work with Knoxville, and their community development corporation, Knoxville's Community Development Corporation, is sort of the instigator of TIF. They sort of manage the intake for the city and the county, and then they manage the process. So they're designated as that manager of that process. And then our private developers, our real estate and financial institutions, they all partner with our development agencies to help make TIF happen. Now, here's a really important thing to keep in mind. And I don't know what Albuquerque is going to do yet. And when we get to that phase of this process, we'll talk about it. But there's two ways to think about development with TIF. You can be passive or you can be active. And what I mean by that is you create your districts and then you passively sit and wait for development to happen and you address it as it comes along, which there's nothing wrong with that. That is some communities' approach. Or you can be active, which means you create your districts, then you go out, create your plans in your districts, then you go out and you recruit master developers, real estate professionals, you get to those business owners and property owners, and you really try to be active and engaged in catalyzing that development process. There really is no like in between. I guess you can be a little bit of both, but I don't recommend trying to straddle two sides of an approach. I think Albuquerque is leaning towards being active, and I think that's probably a good way of thinking about it. So next slide, please. So what are some of the common things we see? This is kind of nuts. I've been doing this for about 27 years. I started in 1998 in this world. So yeah, about 27 years. And way back then, way back when, it was almost exclusively an industrial development tool, meaning communities would create TIF districts and then they would build, design, and create industrial parks inside them. Meaning that if they build the roads and the bridges and the sewers and the utilities and they solidified the pads, that they would then go out and recruit manufacturers to come and lease or build on those sites. And they would use TIF as kind of their industrial development approach. That is completely gone today. Well, yes, there are still places that use TIF for industrial development, mostly in the Midwest or the near South, like Kentucky and Cincinnati and Tennessee and maybe Missouri a little bit. The preponderance of states now use it for mixed use, meaning that they're trying to grab a diversified stream of property taxes. They're not just doing commercial. They're not just doing residential. They're not just doing office. They're not just doing industrial. They're doing a mix of those uses. So you might have first floor retail, second, third, fourth floor office, and then above that is condos. And so you're trying to get a mix of different real estate products into that development because it diversifies the tax stream that might come in, because you want to have active and engaged users on that site for a long time. So I would say right now the big movement is complex, complicated mixed-use development. Next slide. All right, what does TIF pay for? This is all going to be in your statute. I'm just using these next couple of slides as a general guideline for what we see in most states. Infrastructure, obviously, site prep, facility or amenity construction. These would be public purpose facilities. And you could do things like you see on the screen: acquisition, demolition, planning costs, all the stuff that goes into the pain of redevelopment or developing a site that developers don't necessarily want to pay. But it goes beyond that. Next slide, please. It's commonly used, TIF, to finance infrastructure improvements that are really the needed catalyst to make a project move forward. I'm going to tell you a little thing about real estate professionals 101 here. Developers, they don't want to pay for things that are underground and that nobody sees and they get no return on. And I don't blame them, right? If you've got to go into a big old property or site and you've got to realign the streets and bury the utilities and create wastewater streams and fix the mains and all the traffic signals, they don't want to pay for all that stuff. They want to build their vertical private sector building. They also don't want to clean up your brownfield. They want someone to clean that up for them. And so when we think of TIF, we're trying to think of it as it pays for the things that helps make the project move forward, that the developer simply cannot shoulder in their pro forma of their deal. Next slide. Now, it goes beyond that, though. So when we're thinking about district-wide TIF, which this is mostly what we're talking about here in this webinar, we want to be cognizant that the private development is just a piece of it. But planning involves connecting roads, bridges, lighting, traffic signals, pavers, medians. It even goes as far as to parks and recreation and the engagement that goes into a big district. When you walk into a district-wide TIF, you don't just look at one building and go, wow, that's a great building. You look all around and you realize that tax increment went to pay for a lot of projects, both public and private serving. So we want to think about expanding our thoughts on that. And then next slide, you can skip. This is just more of that conversation. And then let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. Like I said, there's two kind of categories of public improvements: general ones, which we talked about, and then on-site specific ones. And you may designate between those two because they serve kind of a different need in the development process. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So this is not a one size fits all. I wish I could say everybody does it this way, but they don't. They all do it differently. But this is what we consider kind of the best way to approach it. So, requirements for creating a district. The first thing is establishing that TIF district, which MRA has done for the most part, right? Then there's this thing called a but-for analysis. This is an analysis that's done on a project to determine, does it need public assistance? Does it need increment in order to get over the financial gap? One thing that you should note, and I highly encourage this, is go hire someone to do that but-for. You hire a firm like SB Friedman or Stiefel or MuniCap or Halls Hill or a lot of groups, and they'll do that but-for analysis for you and allow you to have some cover from a third party. Then there's a feasibility and market study. So let's say the developer's coming in and she's saying she wants to build a 500-room hotel. That's great and everything, but does that market, does that spot, does that part of the community garner that type of size investment? And you'll do that study to just double check and back up that that investment is going to work in that part of your community. And these a lot of times are where you have the go, no go sort of approach. Then you have the TIF or the development plan. This is an actual written plan that says, city's going to do this, developer's going to do this, and here's the plan. This is the pictures, here's the drawings, here's the renderings, here's how much it's going to cost, what it's going to look like. And then you get to the big boy, which is the development agreement. And this is a legal binding statutory agreement agreed on by the city or the county or whatever the jurisdiction is and the developer. And this is the type of thing that holds everybody's feet to the fire so that we get the development done the way we want it. Let's go to the next slide. All right, this is where it gets a tiny bit confusing, and I don't want to muddy the waters with this one, but there are more than, there's more than a couple ways to finance TIF districts. So, you got this increment, right? And I know MRA and other people are thinking about like, all right, we're getting increment. How are we going to allocate it? How are we going to leverage it? So there's two ways to think about the financing. So let's go back to our example, right? We had this property and they're going to do some redevelopment on it, and you're going to incur a couple $1 million of public investment and support it by TIF. Well, you might just bond against that, meaning that you issue bonds, which are the responsibility of the city or the county or the MRA, depending on who that issuer is. And those bonds are a debt, and then you pay that debt back with the increment, right? That's the simple, kind of simple approach. When I first started doing this is how all TIF was done all over the country. It was a bond issued debt instrument. But some things changed, mostly since probably in the last 10 years, 12 years, coming off of the Great Recession. We started to do this thing called pay as you go. So pay-go, it's called. And what this means is that, yeah, the MRA is going to agree to allocate increment to this project up to $2 million, but the developer has to go out and find the 2 million. So that's called pay-go, meaning they go out, they front the $2 million for that public infrastructure, they pay for it, and then as it's built and as it comes online and is successful, the MRA reimburses that developer by paying as they go. It's harder to do, and it is harder to do, but in today's modern world, it's the way to do it because maybe the city, the county, or MRA doesn't want to take that bond risk or just doesn't feel comfortable going to the bond market for this project for whatever reasons. But they do feel comfortable that the developer can go out and get affordable capital and be paid back as the project goes along. If I had to tell you, the biggest shift in TIF in the last 25 years, it's this, meaning there's more pay-go now than there has ever been in the past. Next slide, please. All right, so we don't have to do TIF one way. This is why we're here, right? Traditionally, there's been, the one way, which is like project by project. So you got a 20-acre site or you got a 1-acre site, doesn't really matter. And you're going to do a TIF district around that site, and you're going to use TIF proceeds on that one property to help move that project forward. Pretty standard. That's called a project-specific TIF. But then there's this thing called a district-wide TIF, which is now what Terry was referencing earlier. We have an opportunity to open up. So let's go to the next slide. I'm gonna skip this right here because you guys know project-specific TIF. You got a single project, you got a district, you got increment, not complicated, and that's pretty standard. But let's go to this next slide, which is district-wide TIF. So district-wide TIF, you got maybe multiple hundreds of property owners. You have complex and significant transactional due diligence that's required. You got larger areas of land. It can include entire neighborhoods, entire downtown districts. It can straddle different areas. Sometimes we call those barbells, where you have an area in your TIF district here and one here, and it's connected by a road or along a small strip of land. So you've got very different needs at each ends of the barbell. You're doing probably major infrastructure as opposed to minor infrastructure from a single project, meaning that there's more complexity to traffic flows and infrastructure and water needs. There's probably more environmental involved because you have to figure out what the impact of each project's going to be on the district. But it's also got a ton of positive things. It lends itself towards land assembly. I'd love to see like the MRA get involved in land acquisition and land assembly and really being a catalyst for redevelopment. I know it's just my opinion, but that's what I like to see in this world. But you also have to think about that it's a process. Like district-wide TIF does not happen as quickly as single project TIF or project-specific TIF, but district-wide TIF is far more transformative. Now, the next time you're out and about in, say, St. Louis or Columbus, Ohio, or Baltimore, or let's go somewhere a little more attractive like Miami or Dallas or Austin, or maybe you're in Boston, or maybe you're in Washington, D.C., and you're seeing those major vibrant, lively development areas. Those are all TIFs, every single one of them. You know, the French Quarter and Bourbon Street in New Orleans is a TIF. Dallas, the whole downtown is a TIF, and there are other areas in Dallas are TIFs. I mean, you can just go to any major big city, Dallas or Denver and the Denver Urban Renewal Authority and Stapleton, all a TIF. And so this is catalytic. So when we're thinking of district-wide, we have to think way bigger picture. Miranda, next slide, please. All right, I'm going to give you the silly elementary example here. And I know these numbers are round. They're round for a reason because I forget the numbers and then I can't remember what I said. So these are round numbers. We've got this piece of property. It's generating $50,000 a year. We designate it as a TIF district. The tax base at that point is frozen at 50,000. And a new project comes along and it's going to be proposed that once that project happens, it's going to raise the taxes generated to $550,000. Now, I'm going all in taxes. I'm not being specific to New Mexico, whether it's the state portion, the local portion, or whatever. I'm just saying the new taxes will be $550,000. And the developer says, I'm willing to make $18 million of investment on this property, but I need $2 million MRA for these public improvements. And MRA says, all right, we're going to have to review this. So let's go to the next slide. So MRA says, okay, let's conduct our but-for test. Let's look at our feasibility study. And then after that's all done, MRA determines that, yeah, we're gonna fund the $2 million. We're gonna use generated increment to pay off the debt for the $2 million. So in this case, MRA issues bonds. Maybe MRA says, no, developer, you go and you find the additional $2 million and we'll pay you back as you go along. I said bonds in this case. Once that project is completed, we do a new assessment. And just like we talked, that property is now generating $550,000 a year in taxes. That frozen base continues to go to everybody that was getting it. And the additional increment goes to pay the debt service off. Now, I used silly numbers and round numbers. It's not that simple. It's not that easy. It's way, way more complex. That's why you hire great bond counsel, great TIF counsel, and excellent financial underwriters and advisors on this stuff. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is that I kind of gave you a simple project example. If we were doing a district, you'd be doing an evaluation on a larger scale, and you'd be thinking about how each project materializes and how they affect each other. Now, the other thing is you could be spinning off increment. So look down on the screen and you'll see increment, 500,000. Now, I don't suggest that you take that 500,000 and immediately start paying off all the debt service. What I would suggest is you take 250 of that and you pay a debt service payment, but then you take that additional 250 and you use it as increment to apply to other projects so that you can help catalyze and move other projects forward. You can even consider taking that additional increment and creating funds, redevelopment funds, small business loans, historic preservation funds, whatever it might be to help you move more projects forward in that district. Now, that takes a lot of time and attention and a fine-tooth approach because you can't make mistakes, but it's the way to take a district, spin off increment on different projects, and then use portions of that increment to fund future development efforts in that part of your community. We've actually seen communities that take portions of their increment and they put it in a brownfield fund, and then they use that brownfield fund to lend out to developers to clean up brownfields on low-cost loans. So lots of things you can think about there. Next slide. So what happens at the end of the day? The increment is used to pay off the debt. This can be anywhere from, I say 10, but I actually think it's probably more like 7 to 40 years trying to get in and get out. Now with a district, you're going to have it open for a longer time. So you may stretch out your payments for a longer period because why not? You've got low cost capital. So you stretch those debt service payments out longer, capturing more increment and using it for different development needs. Once it's all paid off, hypothetically, the district is unfrozen. But in this case, you're talking about district-wide TIF. So you may keep that district open for 20 or in some cases 40 years, depending on what state statute's going to say. The real key here is no new taxes were requested, no existing taxes were used. Now I want to hit on that orange piece. No new taxes were requested. Nobody asked the developer, the MRA, the city, the county, nobody was asked to pay more taxes, other than the developer, who knows going into it that they'll have to pay more taxes because they're improving the property, right? Which is totally normal. If I improve my home significantly, my city and county comes out and assesses my new home and gives me a new value of what my tax bill is going to be. The other piece is no existing taxes were used in financing the project. I always say this part. The cost of doing nothing is nothing. If you do nothing in your districts, then you don't have increment to spin off. If you do something, then that increment is there because you catalyzed it, you made it happen. And so that new capital, that new tax revenue, that increment, you're going to put it right back into the project to help feed the success of that project. All right, let's skip this next slide. Go to the next slide. All right, there's just 3 things to talk about really quick before I hit some case studies. I know I'm going fast, everybody. I apologize. But, this is a quick hitter on whatever day of the week it is. What is it, Tuesday, Miranda? Yeah. All right, due diligence, transparency, accountability. I can't, next slide. I can't in good faith not talk about these important elements of a TIF program. And the MRA, to their credit, they're already getting ahead of all this with you all. But you got to do this stuff. And I have watched, folks, for 27 years, communities who avoid these 3 things, and then they wonder why they're getting called to the carpet or to the legislature or to the governor's office or on the front page of the newspaper for doing bad transactions. So the first one is due diligence. You got to go through the steps. You got to be pretty conservative, have applications, fees. It's not a free game. It's not a free system. You got to crunch the numbers. You have to have math, financial wonks involved. You've got a lot of data that you'll need to collect. You got to ask all these questions, digging through the data, digging through the project, understanding the markets, and then seeking partnerships with developers who want to provide all that data, those numbers, in that information. Because the key here is to not accept assumptions. I'll give you a perfect example. Your developer is saying, I'm only getting a 5x return. I need TIF funds. Well, you find out that developer inherited the property 30 years ago from their father, and they don't really have any cost to it. Well, they're getting more than a 5x. And so you really have to know what the assumptions are, or not accept the assumptions and really look at the data on your own. Let's go to the next slide. You may or may not want to do it, but the but-for test is good public policy. It's a good CYA, cover your beep. It helps you provide buy-in to the community. It helps you conduct good, rational justification for why you're approving the TIF funding. It eliminates that corporate welfare argument or the rich get richer, because what you're really doing is driving the tax dollars that you as a community have earned by catalyzing development back into your community. And then due diligence and the but-for test really helps you set the ratio for like how much you'll put in into your TIF deals. You may not be able to fund, all of the gap. And this really lets you set your limits and your abilities and adjust that over time. Next slide. Next slide. All right, transparency. I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know anything about Albuquerque politics. I don't know what the community is like in terms of what transparency means to you, but I know what it means to me where I live. And that is, it has to be an open and welcoming process in your community. If you do this stuff behind closed doors and you have mayors and council people and other people making the transactions happen without all of the transparency, it's going to fail. I can promise you that. And I've gone all over the country over the last 21 years talking about transparency, building consensus, admitting failure when something doesn't happen or work the way you wanted it to work, and then really strategizing for changes. I'm willing to bet that none of us foresaw the pandemic, right? We did not think that our world would slow down and shut down to the point of being trapped in our homes for several months. That really impacted a lot of communities that had not done their due diligence and were not transparent about their TIF deals because their tax revenues dried up. Particularly those states that rely on sales tax to help fund TIFs. If you don't have sales in those districts, how do you fund those TIF deals? And so what's really important to note is that you want to plan for roadblocks, you want to plan for changes, and you want to find great partners and great champions in your community for your deals. Next slide. I mean, and the last part is you got to be accountable, right? You know, you can't sit back and think that everything will happen because you want it to. You have to have great application and approval processes, standard descriptions of what industrial means, blight means. What is your philosophy on supporting retail? You have to have policies around when you'll invest and how much you'll invest. You have to have targeting policies about this is the geography we care about right now. Someday we may make another district over there, but not till we achieve our goals here. And like I mentioned, nowadays, TIF is so much more complicated because you have to take things like transportation and housing into effect. You can't build all this new development or encourage and catalyze all this new development without thinking about the people that may or may not be able to afford to live there. And then consider those broader goals. What is the purpose of our program? What is the ethos of it? What is our plan? What is our strategy? And have TIF be accountable to that plan. Next slide, please. Accountability also involves your systems. I'm going to be disappointed if in 5 years I learn that, you know, China and Sarah and Terry didn't put a process in place. Who vets them? What's the framework for your input from your community? How do you know if a project is success, and what's the timeline for implementation? What steps are taken to ensure that you're protecting the citizens, the tax base, the property owners in that district? What are the details around the fiscal impact? How are you reporting that out? Are you measuring every year and then putting a report out that says our TIF district did this year? You know, how are you explaining the process? Look, I've been doing this for 27 years. I can explain TIF in my sleep. As a matter of fact, when Miranda asked me if I'd be willing to do this, I said, I could probably do this presentation in my sleep, Miranda. And so I'm good at it, right? But some person, like let's say Miranda just lives down the street from you in that TIF district, she wants to know what's going on. So we have to be able to diagram and explain to her as a citizen how TIF works. Now, I'm just kidding because Miranda, she probably knows how TIF works. Let's go to the next slide. All right, you want to talk about some places? Let's talk about some places. Next slide, please. There you go. All right, Tennessee. Let's go to the next slide. So Tennessee has an awesome TIF law. They allow numerous different agencies to manage TIF. They let their IDBs, their housing authorities, their redevelopment authorities. They have actually like a convention and center and tourism development authorities. So they're all allowed to instigate and manage TIF. So what does it turn into? Let's go to the next slide. So in Tennessee, their IDBs, they borrow money that's secured by a pledge of the tax increment. So many times the Industrial Development Board will borrow the money. They will typically not issue bonds, or they'll do developer notes. They'll arrange TIF loans with financial institutions, and then they'll provide the project with those TIF funds, and they'll be reimbursed as those projects costs happen. Let's go to the next slide. I'll just show you some examples. This is Nashville. Nashville is really big on their, 10 different districts. They focus on combating disinvestment and blight. They're also heavily focused on transit-oriented development. And then at that bottom thing is they're really trying to cater towards transit-efficient areas, but increase mobility around their districts in that part of their community. And you can see a couple, the way that, like, next slide, the way that you're eligible is they're through the state legislature. Those powers are given to the redevelopment agency. They can do land acquisition, clearance, all this fun stuff, planning, administration. They can also do spinning of increment off to support other projects. And just a couple, let's skip this next slide. We'll just look at some pictures. This is the Icon in the Gulch, 5th and Main, 1821 Jefferson, 1021 Dickerson Pike. These are all mixed use. Like I mentioned, they're all mixed use redevelopment projects that have very much spurred the revitalization, particularly in the Gulch, which is a redevelopment area of Nashville. Go to the next slide. This is important to note. These are all public amenities, right? The Music City Center, the First Horizons Park, and the Ascend Amphitheater. You know, sometimes you're trying to incorporate public purpose into your TIF deals. And so you've got these facilities that help serve the community. And then you've got, you know, next slide, just all sorts of other things like Ryman Auditorium, you know, the original home of the Grand Ole Opry, which is a huge public music venue. Then you've got trolley barns. So this might apply a little bit to like what Albuquerque is thinking. You've just got this part of your community that has so much potential, but it hasn't seen investment in many decades. And so this is trolley barn. This is where the city used to park all the trolleys. And now they're revitalizing that and redeveloping trolley barn as they go along using a district-wide approach. So that's Tennessee. Let's go to the great state of Ohio. That's where we're headquartered. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, case study. So this is Bridge Park in Dublin, Ohio. This is actually, what do you say, Miranda, about 1.5 miles from us? Yeah, well, Miranda's at her house, but it's 1.5 miles from me and our offices. This used to be one of those nasty strip mall centers that just like unproductive traffic nightmares. And the city, you know, Dublin City, went in with the county finance authority, and they created a TIF district, and they redeveloped this to now it's, you know, this big, huge project that has been highly successful. Let's go to the next slide. So the way that we did this is they issued bonds through the Columbus-Franklin County Finance Authority. The city committed some TIF revenues as well as some abatement. And then they used this thing called the New Communities Authority, which is a special assessment model where they assess the special tax on each property owner. And that's helping to pay additional bonds back. They placed a bed tax in place. So every hotel room that's sold on the site has a little bed tax as tax increment revenue that's pledged towards the debt service. And it has been an absolute stunning success. It is one of the most prized development deals in Central Ohio. And if you ask anybody in Central Ohio, you've been to Bridge Park, everybody says yes, of course, you know, because it's just amazing. And it's infill. It's not out in the cornfields. It's not out in the country. It's literally an infill inside our outer belt and closer to our central city than away from it. So it's a great project. Let's go to the next slide. So this is important to note because this is our development authority. This is the Columbus-Franklin County Finance Authority. This is who does our public finance in Central Ohio. So think MRA, but maybe they have a larger footprint than MRA. I don't know that for sure, but so they have all of Columbus and Franklin County, plus our development authorities can issue bonds all over the state. So they're what's called a multi-jurisdictional bond issuer. And so they do projects for public, nonprofit. Let's go to the next slide. They do energy, they do bond fund programs, TIF, and let's go to the next slide. This is another great example. This is urban infill in a little first ring suburb in Columbus called Grandview Yards. It's a 150-acre project, and it's about $148 million in tax-exempt financing has gone into it, all supported by tax increment revenue. So kind of a crazy project, right? $148 million of investment using tax increment finance as an example to catalyze redevelopment. This is just more on Grandview Yards. We'll skip that next slide. Let's go to Maryland. This one I know might interest a lot of you. This is Harbor Point in Baltimore. This is upfront developer held bonds issued on behalf of the community. And then it's helped create this special tax district. And they've got all the steps in place. But what I really wanted to point out about Baltimore is Baltimore does something unique. They create their TIF districts and they take slices of their TIF revenue and they use it for building public infrastructure. That doesn't necessarily serve one project, serves the whole district. They create workforce training programs. They create small business loan funds. And so they're an example of a community that thinks a little bit more creatively with their use. Miranda, let's jot down to, let's go past New York. Let's go to Pennsylvania. There we go. So this is the Urban Renewal, I'm going to get that wrong. What is it? Urban Redevelopment Authority of Pittsburgh. This is their economic development agency that does urban revitalization. and they are amazing. They do all of the tax increment finance deals that happen in Pittsburgh, and then Allegheny County does all the deals that happens in Allegheny County. You can see like the way they use, next slide, their projects. They're all over the map when it comes to the way that they manage and use tax increment finance. Here's a couple examples. Next slide, Southside Works, Riverfront, Brownfield Development. It's been about 25 million in infrastructure supported by TIF, but more so, they used a lot of their TIF to clean up their brownfields. They siphoned off revenue or increment, and they use it for their brownfield cleanup. Now that's important to note because Pittsburgh has a lot of brownfields from their steel industry, and so they're using sliced off elements of increment to help repay remediation costs for cleaning up brownfields. Next slide. You can just kind of see like all the success stories. Next slide. I guess this is an Ohio one that snuck in. I don't know. I just like to put this as a farm, and they use TIF to help this farm cover the cost of maintenance and improvements. And it's just an example of a creative TIF. And then you all know about Chicago. You know, Chicago is the OG. They have crafted and invented TIF and kind of made it what it is. So you can learn more about TIF. They've done, next slide, extensions of their red line using TIF, developed all sorts of things. And then our last example might be the one that you want to see the most or learn most about, which is, let's go one more slide, Miranda. Sorry, we'll go to Colorado, one more slide. This is DURA. This is the Denver Urban Renewal Authority, created in '58, and they do housing and redevelopment, and they are pretty awesome. Next slide. They've been using tax increment finance to do a whole host of development from housing and redevelopment, but probably their biggest success story is Stapleton. Stapleton is their former airport that was closed so they could get their new airport. They reinvested using TIF and rebuilt Stapleton, and they created programming to help develop businesses, to help guide public infrastructure. And Miranda, if you skip down 2 slides, I'll just end with a couple of screenshots. If you want to look for great examples, go to Milwaukee. The Redevelopment Authority of City of Milwaukee is one of the best. Creating programming. They use TIF that's successful in one district, and they use that TIF money to invest in other districts to get them going, which is a really unique tool. And then the last one, 2 slides, Miranda, is Beltline. This is Atlanta. This is their TIF. They are using TIF to reestablish their Beltline around the city, an old pre-civil rights era trolley system. They're unearthing it. And then they're using TIF to support local developers because gentrification is a big issue for them. So they're using TIF to help seed and catalyze particularly Black-owned developers, Black-owned business developers, to help them develop back into their community and be part of the revitalization of the Beltline. All right, I went really fast. I'm losing my voice, I think. Our next slide. If you want to learn more about TIF, we have the largest, most comprehensive tax increment finance resource center in the world. And then next slide, if you're not too busy in a month, I encourage you all to come down to San Juan, Puerto Rico and join us for our national summit. My name's Toby. That's Miranda. We appreciate you all. Happy to answer any questions. Feel like I went really fast, China. I'm sorry.
No, it was perfect. We'll give you a minute to catch your breath. It was an amazing amount of information. Definitely want to thank you for speaking to Albuquerque and to New Mexico today, because we have people on the call from all over New Mexico. And we actually, amazingly enough, do not have any questions in our Q&A.
I answered them all. I answered them all.
I think you did. I absolutely think that you did. But I'm really curious. There's so many things that are so important about what you said. But I want to go back a little bit to what you were talking about with kind of the politics when you're setting up your TIF, and especially what we're looking at right now is our TIF governance structure. So we just got some state regs passed down to us, and I know there's examples of different kinds of governance structures all over the country. But I was just wondering if you could touch briefly on that. I think that was the only thing I wasn't sure about, just some best practices for how TIF boards or commissions are run, and what are some of the pitfalls that we should avoid as a city?
Yeah, it's a great question. We could do a whole webinar on that one someday if you want. So I'll give you two great resources. If you had to reach out to anyone, I would reach out to Madison, Wisconsin and Milwaukee, Wisconsin, because those are the two communities that do it the best when it comes to governance and structure. The key to me on the governance is you have to have thorough process and procedures, but it can't be so combative that a developer or a property owner has to go through, war just to get an award. So that's like a razor's edge, right? How are you thorough and procedurally accurate and good without being cumbersome? So that's kind of like the pitfall. And by that, on cumbersome, you got to find a really streamlined approval process. You have to have a really streamlined review process. And when you take it to whoever it has to go to for its final approval, it's got to be a fully baked ship. It can't be like we're going to have first reading, second reading, third reading, and 4 months later, you still haven't approved this thing, because that developer, time is money, and you're really putting them in a bad spot. And on that same front, if you take 4 or 5 months to approve a simple TIF transaction, that developer is going to quit, and you're going to get a reputation for being slow and being ineffective. So that's not supposed to be mean. I'm not trying to be mean about that, because I know you guys will come up with a good policy and a good set of procedures, but it has got to be efficient. It has to be efficient. The other thing is CYA. I mean, in governance, have a system. If you want to score deals, if you want to score like projects, have a really good system. Knoxville has a good scoring system. Madison, Wisconsin has a great scoring system where they score applications. And if you have to earn a certain number of points in order to even get considered. And then it's a negotiation with like how much TIF revenue you'd consider putting into a project or to a deal. So on governance, definitely efficient policy procedures. And I hate to say this on a webcast because I know you're recording this, but you've got to get the politicians out of it. I mean, I don't know what your landscape is like, but if the politicians are involved in the decision-making process, it's going to be very, very difficult for you all. So try to figure out how to massage a system that allows you to be really, really efficient with using the tool.
Thank you. That is definitely something to consider. And we do have a question here in the chat. I think you talked about this. We'll allow this one, maybe two questions. It says that, are there examples of establishing TIF districts that take the taxes from the whole district as the baseline and then use increases in the taxes for the whole area for the TIF fund? I think you answered that, but maybe you want to just
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty normal practice. I mean, if you're doing a district, right, that's hypothetically one pot, all the increments coming in from the district. So, you don't let anyone tell you that you don't have the ability to segment or segregate that increment in the directions you want to go. So if you want to say some of it's going to go to like hardcore development costs, but we're going to parse pieces off for these needs, like a park or an amenity or a small business loan fund. Yeah, you absolutely can do that. And I don't have them right in front of me right now, but there's lots of examples of that.
Thank you. And then the last one before I think we sign off, it's not so much of a question, but just saying, great presentation. I love the idea of using a small amount of funds for workforce development and affordable housing. And definitely streamlining the process is key. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit, just briefly, more about that we're using funds for workforce development and affordable housing for district?
Yeah, I mean,
works.
That is the catch-22 of tax increment finance. So you go in to revitalize an area and suddenly they need 10,000 people to work there. And I'm just making that number up, but you don't have the workforce. So like in Baltimore, they have Port Covington, which is a huge project, and they're going to have tens of thousands of people coming to work in Port Covington. Well, Baltimore has an education workforce gap. So they're actually using some funds to create workforce investment centers or workforce development centers, workforce programs, so that those people can get placed into the businesses and the companies that come and work there, or come and occupy that new TIF district. And it's a brilliant way of getting the local people involved in the success of the district. So that's pretty important. Now, on the affordable housing thing, I can't stress this enough. You can build all the awesome TIF districts you want in the world, but if you don't have an affordable housing component in them, it's really going to struggle, because the people that want to work in that district, enjoy that district, they probably don't have the means to buy an $800,000 condo or a $600,000 condo. So you got to have a way that the people that are going to end up working and occupying this space are able to live there or be part of that. So workforce is affordable housing is a big need. And you're using the TIF in that case to buy down the cost of that affordable housing effectively.
Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. Once again, this has been a lot of food for thought for us. We really appreciate you spending time with us today. And we're definitely looking forward to continuing to work with CDFA as we build out our programs here in Albuquerque.
Hey,
Thank
we're
you
here to
everyone for
help.
joining.
And if you ever need me to have a free trip to New Mexico, I would happily come to Albuquerque.
We would love to have you here in person.
All right.
Thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your invite.
Bye-bye.